The pneumonia hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday morning in late October. One moment I was arranging the autumn mums on my porch. The next I was sprawled on the cold wooden floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. My chest felt like someone had wrapped iron bands around it and was tightening them with each labored breath. The flowers I'd been holding scattered across the floor like fallen soldiers, their bright orange and yellow petals mocking the grayness creeping into my vision. I managed to crawl to the phone, the old landline I'd refused to give up, despite my children's insistence that I get a cell phone. My trembling fingers could barely grip the receiver. I dialed 911, and the operator's calm voice felt like a lifeline as darkness pulled me under. When I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, the fluorescent lights burning my eyes, I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. The beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell were my only companions. A nurse with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun checked my vitals and explained that I'd been unconscious, that the pneumonia had been severe, that I'd nearly died. "Your emergency contact has been notified," she said gently, adjusting my IV. "I'm sure they'll be here soon." But I knew better. I'd raised 3 children by myself after their father walked out, when the youngest was still in diapers. I'd worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. I'd attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every sports game, even when exhaustion made my bones ache. I'd sacrificed everything. My dreams of becoming a teacher, my youth, my chance at love again, all for them. And now, lying in this hospital bed at 67 years old, I wondered if any of it had mattered. My oldest, Richard, was a successful corporate lawyer in Manhattan, 43 years old, married to a woman who looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her designer shoe. They had 2 children I barely knew, who called me Grandma, Eleanor, in stiff rehearsed voices during their obligatory holiday visits. Richard had been a sweet boy once, always trying to help, always protective of his younger siblings. But somewhere between Harvard Law and his 6-figure salary, he'd forgotten where he came from. He'd forgotten the mother who'd sewn his Halloween costumes from bed sheets and had eaten crackers for dinner so he could have meat on his plate. My middle child, Jennifer, was a real estate agent in California, 40 years old, divorced twice, always chasing the next big sale, the next commission check. She called me once a month, dutiful and distant, our conversations lasting exactly 7 minutes before she'd manufacture an excuse to hang up. "Sorry, Mom, I have a showing." Or, "Mom, I've got a client on the other line." Jennifer had been my wild child, the one who'd tested every boundary, who'd screamed that she hated me when I wouldn't let her go to that party when she was 16. She'd grown into a beautiful woman who kept everyone at arm's length, including me. Then there was Daniel, my youngest at 37. Daniel, who still lived in the same small town where I'd raised them, just 15 minutes from my house. Daniel, who worked as a mechanic at Joe's auto shop, his hands perpetually stained with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed. Daniel, who'd never married, never had children, who everyone said hadn't amounted to much. Daniel, who I'd worried about the most, who'd struggled in school, who'd been called slow by cruel teachers who didn't understand that he just learned differently. Daniel was the one I'd called when the operator asked for my emergency contact, though I'd listed all 3 of my children on the hospital forms. 4 days passed. The pneumonia slowly released its grip on my lungs. I graduated from an oxygen mask to a nasal cannula. I could sit up without feeling like I was drowning, I could eat the bland hospital food without vomiting, and still, I was alone. On the 5th day, a Saturday afternoon, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart leapt stupidly, hopefully. The door opened, and there stood Daniel. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face unshaven, his work jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He had a plastic grocery bag in one hand and a bouquet of cheap carnations in the other. The kind you buy at the gas station. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees beside my bed, careful not to disturb any of the tubes and wires. Tears streamed down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I came as soon as I could. I was up in northern Michigan helping Uncle Pete with his roof when you called, and my phone died, and I didn't get the messages until Thursday night. I drove straight through. I'm so sorry I wasn't here." I touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under my palm, and something in my chest that had nothing to do with pneumonia finally eased. "You're here now," I whispered. Daniel stayed. He took a week off work, unpaid because he'd already used all his vacation days helping his uncle. He slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair that couldn't have been good for his back. He helped me to the bathroom when I was too proud to use the bedpan. He made the nurses laugh with his corny jokes. He read to me from the newspaper, even the boring parts, because he knew I hated being disconnected from the world. He brought me real food, a burger from that diner I loved, chocolate pudding-like. I used to make for them when they were kids. Coffee that didn't taste like hot water passed through a dirty sock. He combed my hair and told me I looked beautiful, even though I knew I looked like death warmed over. He called Richard and Jennifer every single day to give them updates, even though they never asked him to. "Richard says he's swamped with a big case," Daniel reported on day 6, his tone carefully neutral. "He said to tell you he's thinking of you." "Jennifer says she's closing on 3 properties this week," he said on day 7. "She sends her love." I noticed what he didn't say, that neither of them asked when they could visit, that neither of them offered to help, that neither of them seemed particularly concerned that their mother had nearly died. On day 8, the doctor cleared me to go home, but with strict orders. Bed rest for 2 weeks, no stairs, no exertion, someone to check on me regularly. Daniel didn't hesitate. "I'll stay with you, Mom," he said. "I already told Joe I need more time off. You can't afford that," I protested weakly. "I can't afford to lose you," he replied simply, and that was the end of the discussion. He drove me home in his beat-up Ford truck that smelled like motor oil and pine air freshener, driving carefully over every bump, apologizing each time I winced. He'd already been to my house and prepared everything, changed my sheets, stocked the refrigerator, set up a bell on my nightstand so I could ring for him if I needed anything. That first night home, as I lay in my own bed with Daniel sleeping on the couch downstairs, I made a decision. I'd been thinking about updating my will for years, always putting it off, telling myself I had time. But pneumonia had taught me that time was a luxury, not a guarantee. The second week of my recovery crawled by with the maddening slowness of healing. Each morning, Daniel would appear at my bedroom door with a tray, scrambled eggs cooked just right, toast cut diagonally the way I'd always done for them when they were children, and tea with exactly 2 sugars. He'd open the curtains to let in the morning light, fluffing my pillows and asking a dozen times if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, if the room was too cold or too warm. "You're fussing," I'd tell him, but secretly I loved it. When was the last time someone had taken care of me? I couldn't remember. After their father left, I'd become a fortress. Impenetrable and self-sufficient because I'd had to be. There was no one else to rely on, no one to catch me if I fell. I'd learned to fix the plumbing myself, to change my own tires, to handle every crisis alone. Accepting help felt foreign, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's shoes. But Daniel made it easy. He never made me feel weak or pitiful. He'd just smile that gentle smile of his and say, "Let me, Mom. It makes me feel useful." On the third day home, my phone rang. I recognized Richard's number and felt a flutter of something. Hope, maybe. Or the ghost of it. "Mom, how are you feeling?" His voice was brisk, professional. Like he was checking items off a to-do list. "Better," I said. "Much better. Daniel's been—" That's great. Listen, Mom. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get away. This case I'm working on, it's huge. Millions of dollars at stake. The senior partners are counting on me. You understand. I did understand. I understood that I'd raised a son who measured his worth in billable hours and dollar signs, who'd learned to prioritize everything except the people who loved him. "Of course," I said, because what else could I say? "How are Melissa and the kids?" Busy. Madison has violin and soccer, and Tyler just joined the debate team. Melissa's organizing some charity gala. It's chaos here." He laughed, a sound without much humor in it. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. We were thinking about Thanksgiving. We might go to Melissa's parents' place in Connecticut this year. Her mother's been asking, and you know how she gets. But we'll definitely see you at Christmas." Christmas was 2 months away. I'd nearly died, and my oldest son couldn't find time to visit for 2 months. But I swallowed the hurt, forced it down where I'd learned to keep all my disappointments. "That sounds nice," I managed. "Tell Melissa's mother I said hello." "Will do. And Mom, take care of yourself. Maybe consider one of those medical alert systems. You know, the I've fallen and I can't get up thing? Just for peace of mind." For whose peace of mind, I wondered. Certainly not for mine. After we hung up, I sat holding the phone, staring at nothing. Daniel appeared in the doorway, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. "That was Richard?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "He's not coming." It wasn't a question. Daniel had always been perceptive about emotions, even if teachers had called him slow with books. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed, taking my hand in his larger, calloused one. "You don't have to pretend with me, Mom. I know it hurts." And just like that, the tears came. All the tears I'd been holding back for 5 decades. For every scraped knee I'd kissed, every school event where other kids had 2 parents, and mine had only me. Every night I'd cried silently into my pillow wondering if I was enough, if I was doing it right, if they'd grow up to resent me for the poverty, for the absent father, for the sacrifices that never felt like enough. Daniel held me while I cried. This son whose society said hadn't amounted to much, who'd never wear a suit or make 6 figures, who'd never leave this small town. He held me with a tenderness that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. "You were always enough, Mom," he whispered, as if he could read my thoughts. "More than enough. I don't know if I ever told you that, but you were. You are." 2 days later, Jennifer called. I heard her voice, bright and slightly manic, and pictured her in her California office with its glass walls and view of the ocean, surrounded by photos of houses she'd sold and awards she'd won. "Mom, oh my God, I'm so sorry I'm just now calling. Daniel texted me about your pneumonia, but I've been absolutely slammed. You would not believe the market right now. Interest rates are crazy, and everyone wants to buy before they go up even more. I just closed on a $4 million property in Malibu. $4 million! My biggest sale ever? That's wonderful, honey," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. "Anyway, how are you? Daniel said you're home now? That's good, right? I was so worried. Well, I mean, I would have been worried if I'd had time to think about it, but you know how it is. Work, work, work. I let her talk, listening to her chatter about staging and open houses and difficult clients. She barely paused for breath. Finally, she wound down. So anyway, I'll try to come visit soon. Maybe at Christmas or after New Year's. Things always slow down in January. We'll have a proper visit then. Jennifer, I said, and something in my tone must have gotten through because she actually stopped talking. Do you remember when you were 7 and you had that terrible flu? You were so sick, vomiting and feverish, and you were scared. You cried and said you thought you were dying. Mom, where is this? I sat with you for 3 days straight. I barely slept. I held your hair back when you got sick. I read you stories and sang you songs and promised you that you weren't going to die, that I wouldn't let anything happen to you. Do you remember that? Silence. Then, quietly, I remember. I almost died, Jennifer. I had pneumonia. My lungs were filling with fluid. I was unconscious for 3 days. But Daniel said you're okay now. Her voice had changed, become defensive. I am okay because I survived, not because anyone came to make sure I survived. That's not fair, Mom. I have responsibilities, a career, bills to pay. I can't just drop everything and fly across the country every time. She stopped abruptly. Every time what? Every time your mother nearly dies? How often do you think that happens? Another silence, heavier this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. I'm sorry. You're right. I should have come. I don't know, Mom. I don't know how I became this person who's too busy for her own mother. I don't know when that happened. I know when, I said softly. It happened gradually. The same way I became invisible to you. The same way I became an obligation instead of a person. It happened while I was busy being proud of your success and not wanting to be the kind of mother who demands attention. Mom, don't say that. You're not invisible. Then tell me, Jennifer, when was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because it was Mother's Day or my birthday or some obligation, but just because you thought of me and wanted to hear my voice. I heard her breath catch, heard the realization hit her. I'll do better, she whispered. I promise, I'll do better. Promises are easy, sweetheart. It's the keeping them that's hard. After we hung up, I felt exhausted, wrung out like an old dish rag. But I also felt something like relief. I'd spent so many years swallowing my hurt, pretending I didn't need them as much as they didn't seem to need me. Maybe it was the pneumonia, or maybe it was almost dying. But I was done pretending. Daniel made me chicken soup from scratch that night. The kind that takes hours to simmer. The kind you make because you love someone. As I ate it, savoring the rich broth and tender vegetables, I thought about my will, about fairness, about what children truly inherit from their parents. By the 3rd week, I was strong enough to sit in my rocking chair by the window, wrapped in the Afghan I'd crocheted 20 years ago. The autumn leaves were falling in earnest now, carpeting my small yard in shades of rust and gold. Daniel had raked them twice already, but they kept coming. Nature's reminder that some things can't be controlled or cleaned up permanently. I watched him through the window now, raking again, his breath visible in the crisp November air. He'd lost weight these past weeks, I realized. Taking care of me, working reduced hours, probably not eating properly himself. The guilt gnawed at me until he looked up, caught me watching, and grinned. That same wide, uncomplicated smile he'd had as a boy. He waved, and just like that, the guilt transformed into something else. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition of something I'd been too blind to see before. Mom, you've got a visitor, Daniel called from downstairs the next afternoon. I heard the surprise in his voice, and my heart did a foolish little leap. Richard, I thought, or Jennifer. Maybe one of them had actually come. But the woman who appeared in my doorway was neither of my daughters. Margaret Chen had been my neighbor for 15 years, ever since she and her husband bought the house next door. She was 72, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair she wore in a neat bun, and eyes that missed nothing. "Eleanor," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed, with the familiarity of old friendship. "You look terrible," I laughed, which still made my chest hurt a little. "You always were brutally honest, Margaret." "Someone has to be. I brought you sesame chicken from that Chinese place you like. Daniel said you're getting tired of his cooking, though he's too modest to admit he's been cooking at all." She set a warm container on my nightstand. "And I brought something else. Something I've been meaning to give you for a while now. But the timing never seemed right. Maybe there's no right time for this kind of thing." She reached into her large purse and pulled out a thick envelope, cream-colored and official-looking. "I updated my will last month, Eleanor. After Harold died, I realized I'd been putting it off for years, always thinking I had more time. The lawyer who helped me, David Hirsch, over on Maple Street. He's excellent. Patient, thorough, reasonable rates. I thought you might want his number." She placed a business card on top of the envelope. Our eyes met, and in that moment I knew that Margaret understood. She'd probably been watching from her window, had seen Daniel's truck arrive and stay, had noticed that no other cars appeared in my driveway. Margaret had always been observant. It was what made her such a good teacher. "She'dn't complicated," she said softly. "Harold and I had 3 ourselves. 2 never even made it to his funeral. Said they couldn't get away from work. But our youngest, Patricia, she was there. She held my hand through the whole service, stayed with me for a month afterward. She's the one who inherits the house, Eleanor. The others get some money, some jewelry, but Patricia gets the house. Because she showed up, because she loved her father not for what he could give her, but for who he was." "Were the others angry?" I asked. Margaret's smile was sad and knowing. They were shocked. Felt it was unfair. But life isn't fair, Eleanor. Life is a series of choices, and choices have consequences. They chose their careers, their busy lives, their excuses. Patricia chose her father. I simply honored that choice in the only way I still could. After Margaret left, I sat holding the lawyer's business card, turning it over and over in my hands. The afternoon light slanted through my window, casting long shadows across the floor. I could hear Daniel downstairs, humming off-key while he did the dishes. He'd been humming a lot lately. Old songs from the radio, songs I used to sing to them when they were small. I called David Hirsch the next morning. His secretary scheduled me for the following week, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The weight of a decision made, of action taken instead of endlessly deferred. Daniel drove me to the appointment, helping me into his truck with the same careful gentleness he'd shown since the hospital. He didn't ask where we were going, didn't pry. That was Daniel's way. Respectful, trusting, never demanding explanations. David Hirsch's office was exactly what I expected, lined with law books, smelling of old paper and lemon polish, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that felt more like a living room than a place of business. The lawyer himself was perhaps 50, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a handshake that was firm but not aggressive. "Mrs. Morrison, please sit. Can I get you some water? Coffee? Water would be lovely, thank you." He poured from a glass pitcher, the ice cubes clinking musically. Then he sat across from me, legal pad ready, pen poised. "Now, I understand from our phone conversation that you'd like to update your will. Can you tell me a little about your current situation? Your assets, your family?" I took a breath. "I have 3 children. Richard, 43. Jennifer, 40. Daniel, 37. I was married once, divorced 35 years ago. My ex-husband died in a car accident about 10 years back. I haven't remarried. And your assets? This house, which is paid off. It's worth maybe $250,000, according to the last assessment. I have savings of about $80,000. My pension from 30 years working at the textile mill, though that ends when I die. Some jewelry, my mother's engagement ring mostly. A few savings bonds. Life insurance policy worth $50,000. Not much, I know, but it's what I managed to save. David nodded, making notes. That's more than many people have, Mrs. Morrison. You should be proud. Now, typically, parents divide their estates equally among their children. Is that what you're planning? I stared at my hands, at the age spots and prominent veins, at the wedding ring I still wore, though I'd removed my husband's picture from the wall decades ago. No, I said quietly. No, that's not what I'm planning. David set down his pen. All right. Tell me what you envision. And so I did. I told him about raising 3 children alone, about working multiple jobs, about the sacrifices and the exhaustion and the fierce, consuming love that had driven every decision I'd made. I told him about the pneumonia, about lying in that hospital bed for 5 days, about the phone calls and the excuses, and the absence that spoke louder than any words could. Then I told him about Daniel. I told him about the carnations from the gas station, about the week of unpaid work, about the sleeping in a hospital chair and the patient combing of my hair. I told him about the chicken soup and the dishes and the humming while he worked. I told him about a man who the society said hadn't achieved much, but who'd shown me the only achievement that truly mattered, the ability to love without keeping score. I want Daniel to have the house, I said, and most of the savings, maybe $60,000. Richard and Jennifer can split the rest, $10,000 each, and the jewelry and personal items. Those go to Daniel too, to distribute as he sees fit. He'll be fair. He's always been fair. David studied me for a long moment. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Are you of sound mind? Has anyone pressured you to make this decision? I ask because unequal distributions often lead to contested wills, and I need to ensure this is truly your wish. I'm 77 years old, Mr. Hirsch, and I've never been more certain of anything. Daniel didn't ask for this. He doesn't even know I'm here. I'm doing this because it's right, because it honors what really happened, not what I wish had happened. Your other children will likely be upset. My other children have been upset with me for various reasons their entire lives. When they were teenagers, they were upset I couldn't afford designer clothes. When they went to college, they were upset I couldn't pay for everything. When I got sick, they were upset that illness isn't convenient. This will be one more thing for them to be upset about, but at least this time, I'll be beyond hearing about it. David Hirsch worked on my will for the next 2 hours, asking detailed questions, making sure every word was precise and legally sound. He explained that I could add a letter of explanation, not legally binding, but something that would clarify my intentions, that might help my children understand. Some people find it cathartic, he said gently, a way to say the things they never found the courage to say in life. I thought about that as Daniel drove me home, past the familiar streets of the town where I'd raised my children, past the school where they'd learned to read, past the park where I'd pushed them on swings until my arms ached. Did I want to explain myself? Did I owe Richard and Jennifer an explanation? That night, after Daniel had gone to sleep on the couch, he still refused to go home, insisted I still needed someone close by. I sat at my old writing desk and pulled out a sheet of cream-colored stationery. My hand trembled slightly as I uncapped my fountain pen, a gift from my mother on my 16th birthday, over 60 years ago. My dear children, I wrote, then stopped, crossed it out, started again. Richard, Jennifer, and Daniel, I wrote. By the time you read this, I will be gone. The words looked stark and final on the page. I stared at them for a long time, watching the ink dry, thinking about endings and beginnings and all the messy, complicated middle parts of a life. I wrote through the night, pouring decades of unspoken thoughts onto paper. I wrote about their father leaving, about the terror and loneliness of sudden single parenthood. I wrote about the jobs, the factory work, the weekend cleaning houses, the evening shift at the diner where I smiled at customers until my face ached. I wrote about missing their school plays because I had to work, about the Christmas when money was so tight. I gave them each one the small gift and pretended I preferred not to exchange presents. I wrote about watching them grow, about the pride and the worry and the slow, painful realization that children aren't possessions to keep, but people to release. I wrote about Richard's acceptance to Harvard, about how I'd cried with joy and terror, because I knew it meant losing him to a world I'd never be part of. I wrote about Jennifer's wedding, both of them, and how neither time did she ask me to help plan, as if she was embarrassed by my small-town simplicity. I wrote about Daniel's high school graduation, how the principal had called him perseverant, in a tone that made it sound like an insult, and how I'd wanted to march up on that stage and tell them all how brilliant he was in the ways that mattered. I don't write this to make you feel guilty. I wrote as dawn light began filtering through the curtains. I write it because I need you to understand that love is not just a feeling. It's not something you claim to have while doing nothing to demonstrate it. Love is action. Love is sacrifice. Love is showing up even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard, even when there are a dozen other places you'd rather be. Daniel showed up. When I was at my weakest, when I was frightened and alone, when I genuinely believed I might die in that hospital room with no one holding my hand, Daniel showed up. He didn't have the money for time off work. He didn't have the luxury of a salary that continues whether he's at his desk or not. But he came anyway. He stayed anyway. He loved me in the language I understand best. The language of presence, of care, of putting someone else's needs before his own comfort. This is not punishment for you, Richard and Jennifer. This is recognition for Daniel. There is a difference, though I'm not sure you'll see it. I have loved all three of you with every fiber of my being. I would have died for any of you without hesitation. But Daniel was the one willing to live for me, to disrupt his life, to sacrifice his own comfort. And that, my darlings, deserves to be honored. I signed it, sealed it in an envelope, and paperclipped it to the will documents. Then I went back to bed and slept for the first time in weeks without dreams. The holidays approached with their usual mixture of obligation and expectation. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away, and I knew I needed to address it. I couldn't let Daniel spend the day taking care of me, cooking a meal for two in my small kitchen, pretending we didn't both notice the absence of the others. I called Richard first, catching him between meetings. Sweetheart, I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving. Oh, Mom, didn't I tell you? We're doing Connecticut this year. Melissa's mother has been asking for ages, and I know. You told me. I'm calling to say that's fine. You should go. Be with Melissa's family. Silence. He'd expected me to guilt him, to play the martyr. Are you sure? I'm sure. Give everyone my love. Jennifer was similarly surprised when I told her I didn't expect her to fly home. But, Mom, won't you be alone? Daniel will be here. Oh, right, of course. Something in her voice, was it relief? Or maybe shame? We could do a video call. Have Thanksgiving dinner together over the computer. That would be nice, honey. But we both knew it wouldn't happen. Something would come up. A last-minute showing. A client emergency. One of the 1,000 excuses she'd perfected over the years. Daniel, however, had different plans. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke to the smell of roasting turkey, of sage and onions and all the scents of my childhood. I made my way downstairs slowly, still careful with my healing lungs, and found my kitchen transformed. Daniel had invited Margaret from next door, and his Uncle Pete and Aunt Clara, who'd driven down from Michigan. He'd invited 3 other neighbors. Elderly Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who'd lost her husband last year, the young couple 2 doors down who'd just had their first baby, and Joe from the auto shop who had no family in the area. "Mom, I hope this is okay," Daniel said, suddenly uncertain. "I thought, if we're having Thanksgiving, we might as well have it with people who actually want to be here." I looked around my small dining room, at the mismatched chairs Daniel had borrowed, at the card table he'd set up to extend my regular table, at the people who were strangers, or near strangers, but who'd all said yes to my son's invitation. I looked at Daniel, at his hopeful, anxious expression, and felt my heart expand in my chest. "It's perfect," I whispered. "It's absolutely perfect." And it was. We squeezed around the tables, elbows bumping, passing dishes and laughter and stories. Margaret told tales of teaching 6th grade for 40 years, of the student who'd released a snake in her classroom and the one who'd grown up to be a senator. Uncle Pete talked about his hardware store, about the changing face of small-town business. Mrs. Patterson showed pictures of her grandchildren on her phone, her eyes bright with tears and pride. The young couple, Sarah and Tom, let everyone hold their baby, a tiny girl named Emma, who had Daniel's same gentle eyes. No one asked where my other children were. No one made me feel like I was missing something. For the first time in decades, I felt wholly grateful on Thanksgiving. That night, after everyone had gone home and Daniel was washing dishes despite my protests, I sat in my rocking chair and thought about family. Not the one you're born with, but the one you choose, the one you build from presence and care and showing up. Richard and Jennifer were my children, would always be my children. But Daniel was my family in a way that transcended biology. He was the one who'd learned what I'd tried to teach them all. That love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about the daily, unglamorous work of caring. It's about showing up. Part 05 Christmas came with a blanket of snow that transformed our small town into something from a postcard. Daniel strung lights along my porch railing, the colored bulbs reflecting off the white drifts like scattered jewels. He set up my little artificial tree in the corner of the living room, the same tree I'd bought on clearance 30 years ago, its branches slightly bent but still serviceable. "We should get you a new tree, Mom," he said, fluffing the sparse branches. "A nice one." "This tree has history," I told him. "It's seen you all grow up. That's worth more than perfect branches." He smiled and continued decorating, hanging the ornaments we'd collected over the years. The clay handprints from when they were in elementary school, the photo frames with gap-toothed smiles, the popsicle stick creations that had somehow survived decades of packing and unpacking. Each ornament was a memory, a moment frozen in time when my children were small and needed me and didn't yet know how to disappoint me. Richard called on December 20th. "Mom, we're confirmed for Christmas Day. We'll drive up Christmas Eve, stay at the Holiday Inn, and come to your place around noon on Christmas. Is that all right?" My heart stuttered. He was actually coming. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I can't wait to see you all. Jennifer's flying in too," he added. "She called me last week. I think she felt bad about Thanksgiving. Anyway, she'll be there." After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, a mixture of emotions swirling through me. Joy that they were coming, anxiety about what the visit would be like after so many months, and underneath it all, a whisper of something darker. The knowledge of what waited in David Hirsch's office, the will that would eventually drive a wedge through what remained of our family. But no, I told myself firmly. I wasn't driving any wedges. I was simply acknowledging reality, honoring truth. If that created conflict, It was conflict that had always existed, just hidden beneath polite conversations and dutiful phone calls. Daniel cleaned the house from top to bottom, working with the same meticulous care he brought to everything. He washed windows, scrubbed floors, dusted every surface. He bought new towels for the bathroom and made sure the guest room was ready, even though Richard had said they'd stay at a hotel. "Just in case," Daniel said. "In case they change their minds." But I knew they wouldn't. Richard and his family staying in my small house, using my simple bathroom, sleeping on my aging mattress. That world had ended long ago, if it had ever existed at all. Christmas Eve arrived with clear, cold skies. I made cookies. The same sugar cookies I'd made every Christmas since they were children, rolled thin and cut into stars and trees and bells. Daniel helped, his large hands surprisingly deft as he pressed the cookie cutter into the dough. "Do you remember when Jennifer tried to make these by herself when she was 9? He asked, laughing. "She used salt instead of sugar? And we all took a bite and tried to pretend they were good," I said, smiling at the memory. She cried anyway. She always knew when we were lying. "She was sensitive," Daniel said quietly. "Still is, I think. She just hides it better now." That night I barely slept. I kept imagining tomorrow, kept running through scenarios in my mind. Would Richard's children remember me? Would Melissa be as coldly polite as always? Would Jennifer seem distracted checking her phone, mentally already back in California? And what would they think of Daniel, who'd been living here on and off for months, who knew where everything was in my kitchen, who'd become the center of my daily life? Would they feel guilty? Resentful? Defensive? Christmas morning dawned bright and bitter cold. Daniel made breakfast. Pancakes shaped like snowmen, just like I used to make for them. We ate slowly, neither of us mentioning the elephant in the room. That in a few hours our quiet routine would be disrupted by the arrival of the others. At 11:30 I heard car doors slamming. My heart raced. Daniel squeezed my hand. "It'll be okay, Mom." But when I opened the door, I wasn't sure anything would be okay, ever again. Richard stood on my porch in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Melissa was beside him in fur-trimmed boots, her lips pressed into a thin line of distaste, as she took in my humble home. Behind them, Madison and Tyler, 14 and 12 now, were both staring at their phones, barely looking up. "Mom," Richard said, and bent to kiss my cheek. His lips were cold. "You look good. Better than I expected. Better than he expected. As if he'd been expecting to find a corpse. Come in," I said, stepping back. "It's freezing out there." They filed into my small living room, and I watched them take it in. The worn furniture, the dated decorations, the humble Christmas tree. Madison whispered something to Tyler, who snickered. Melissa's expression never changed, but I saw her gaze linger on the water stain on my ceiling, the crack in the plaster I'd never gotten around to fixing. "Daniel," Richard said, nodding at his brother. His tone was neutral, carefully so. "Still here, I see." "Someone had to be," Daniel replied evenly. The tension was immediate and palpable. Before it could escalate, the doorbell rang again. Jennifer burst in with a flurry of cold air and expensive perfume, dragging 2 large shopping bags. "I'm here. Sorry I'm late. The flight was delayed, and then the rental car place was a nightmare, and Mom!" She threw her arms around me, holding on perhaps a moment too long. When she pulled back, her eyes were shiny. "You look so much better. I was so worried. I'm fine, sweetheart. Come in, warm up." She looked around, saw Richard and his family, saw Daniel standing protectively near me. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, of how badly she'd failed, of what she'd missed. "Merry Christmas, everyone," she said too brightly. "I brought gifts. We settled in the living room, an awkward arrangement of bodies trying to find space. Madison and Tyler sat on the floor, still absorbed in their phones. Melissa perched on the edge of the sofa like she was afraid of catching something. Richard took my armchair, his father's old chair, without asking. Jennifer squeezed next to Daniel on the love seat, and I took my rocking chair. "So," Richard said, breaking the silence. "Daniel, Mom tells me you've been staying here? For how long now?" "Since she got out of the hospital," Daniel said. "About 2 months." 2 months? Melissa's eyebrows rose. "Don't you have a job?" "I do. I've been working reduced hours. Joe's been understanding." "How generous of Joe," Richard said, and there was something sharp beneath his words. "And you're staying here because Mom needed someone." Daniel's voice remained calm, but I saw his jaw tighten. Someone had to make sure she took her medications, ate properly, didn't overdo it. The doctor said she shouldn't be alone. "We could have hired a nurse," Richard said, "or one of those home health aid services. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I would have arranged something." "Would you?" The words were out before I could stop them. "Would you have really, Richard? Or would you have been too busy with your important case?" The room went silent. Even Madison and Tyler looked up from their phones. Richard's face flushed. "That's not fair, Mom. I have responsibilities, a family to support." "So did I said quietly. "For decades. Somehow I found time. That was different. You didn't have the kind of career I have. The pressures, the expectations." "You're right," I interrupted. "I just had 3 children to raise alone, with no money and no help. Much easier than your life, I'm sure." "Eleanor," Melissa said sharply, using my first name like a reprimand. "Richard works very hard to provide for this family. The least you could do is show some appreciation." I stared at her. This woman my son had married. This woman who'd never once asked me about my life. Who'd never shown the slightest interest in who I was beyond being Richard's mother. "Get out," I said. Everyone froze. "Mom," Richard started. "Not you. Her." I pointed at Melissa. "Get out of my house!" Melissa's mouth fell open. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This is my home. My son Daniel has been living here, caring for me, sacrificing his income and his comfort because he loves me. You don't get to come into my house and diminish that. You don't get to lecture me about appreciation." "Mom, calm down," Richard said, standing. "Melissa didn't mean—" "Yes, she did. She meant every word, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I'm done with all of it. The polite fiction that we're a close family. The pretending that occasional phone calls and obligatory visits are the same as love. The silence about who actually showed up when I almost died." Jennifer was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm sorry. I know I should have come. I know I failed you." I looked at her, at my wild, beautiful middle child, who'd spent her whole life running from intimacy. "You did fail me, Jennifer, but at least you're honest enough to admit it." "This is ridiculous," Melissa said, grabbing her purse. "Richard, we're leaving." "No," Richard said, and everyone turned to look at him. He was staring at his hands, his face a mask of pain. "No, she's right. Mom's right. I didn't come. I told myself I was too busy, that the case was too important, that you were fine, because Daniel said you were improving. But the truth is I was scared." "Scared?" I repeated. He looked up and I saw tears in my oldest son's eyes. "Scared of seeing you sick? Scared of confronting the fact that you're getting older, that someday you won't be here? Scared of being the kind of son who fails his mother when she needs him most? So I hid behind work, behind excuses, behind the comfortable lie that I'd make it up to you later. But there might not have been a later, might there? You almost died." The words hung in the air. Madison and Tyler were watching their father with wide eyes, perhaps seeing him as human for the first time. Melissa's face had softened slightly, though she still stood with her purse clutched to her chest. "I'm sorry, Mom," Richard continued, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. You deserved better. You deserved so much better than a son who was too cowardly to show up." I stood, my legs shaky, and crossed to him. I took his face in my hands the way I used to when he was small. "You're here now," I whispered. "That matters too." "Does it? After everything?" "Yes," I said firmly. "It does."